In this episode of Cosmic Sponge, we reveal a man with the unique ability to summon UFOs telepathically. New Bigfoot footage suggests footwear and depression. Japan takes a stance on UAP reporting. We discuss the hypothesis of large eels in Loch Ness, which has some basis in science. And finally, we tackle the topic of cattle mutilations and their potential otherworldly origins. Stick around. It's gonna be a gross one.
Welcome to Cosmic Sponge, the podcast where we talk about UFOs and other weird wonders of the world. I'm Stephen Hawk.
And I'm Jimmy Coe.
We have a very bovine episode for you tonight. But before we get started with that, Jimmy, what's been going on in the news?
It seems like it's a pretty slow news cycle. Not a lot going on. But I did find an article about this guy named Robert Bingham. Bingham? B-I-N-G-H-A-M?
That's news right there.
Bingham. Robert Bingham. And he can be found in Sycamore Grove Park in South Pasadena, California, looking at the skies. Not because he's having a stroke, but because he is summoning telepathically UFOs.
Some of that, what was it, last week or the week before? The ESPN. I always want to say ESPN.
ESPN. It's the sports of alien capture, I guess. I don't know.
I don't know. You remember the, what was it, ESP dousing that the Russians...
No, I don't remember that. Oh, the dowsing rods? Were they trying to find UFOs?
They called it biolocation or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know what this cat does, but it looks like he's holding seminars. We'll have a bunch of people come together, and maybe he's instructing them how to summon UFOs.
I see. Does he charge a fee?
I don't know. I mean, the article was pretty slim in what it was providing. It just, I think they thought it was enough to say this guy can telepathically summon UFOs. Leave it at that.
You'll be laughing when he's telepathically summons one on your front lawn one day. He'll look you up.
I won't be laughing.
This podcast.
I'm going to be writing him a check so I can go lick that UFO.
And that's all there is. He just telepathically summons UFOs. Now, when he does this, can he do it on demand?
Apparently, yes. He can just stand in the middle of the beginning of it. He doesn't reveal all of his secrets in the news article that I was watching, or his news video that I was watching. Mm-hmm. He just starts out by saying, well, first I stand and then I look up at a clear blue sky, and then he cuts to a thing. Why they did it? They cut to the video of Go Fast, talking about the Navy jets and stuff, and then they cut back to him, and he's in with a big group of people, and he's saying, "See, there it is," and then other people says, "Oh yeah, I see it." It's like, aha, see, when you're good, you're good.
There are a couple of people, there's a couple of documentaries that have been on Amazon recently. One of them, I think, is called Australian Skies. Have you seen that one?
I've seen the advertisement for it, but I haven't watched it.
Check it out. It's interesting. I mean, the guy says, "Hey, I have all these sightings. I've had all these sightings for a long time, and other people can be with him. He's got all kinds of video evidence." And in fact, the documentary crew went with him, and sure enough, I mean, when he was around and thinking about UFOs, I don't know if he thinks about UFOs or just that they go outside and start looking in the skies, and sure enough, sooner or later, something shows up, day or night. It's, I don't know.
Something to think about.
Yeah, it is something to think about, and I think they went on and made one or two more after that, because I think the documentarian, the filmmaker, was kind of skeptical going into it, but then was a little bit more of a believer. And it's been a while since I watched this documentary. It seems like he does some cuts where he's just talking about the situation, for him, and he just was pretty blown away. I think that this happens. I mean, even while they were making the documentary, they go outside and wait around for a while, and then UFOs just start showing up. Now, I will say none of them hover and land 100 feet away. I mean, they're way high in the sky and everything, but still, they are unusual. Check that video out when you get a chance.
Yeah, will do. I know he's a controversial figure, but Dr. Stephen Greer, in one of his videos, has a bunch of people gathering outside.
Close Encounters of the Fifth Kind, I believe is the name of that one. Yeah, where they claim to be making contact, some type of contact with extraterrestrials. Yeah. I haven't watched all of that. I watched some of it. A lot of his ideas, I mean, maybe, but I'm not convinced.
Yeah. He's an interesting individual.
He definitely is full of convictions, and he's been at it for a very long time.
And he's a doctor.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I got ice in my drink. It's going to be a nightmare editing it out.
That's okay. I've got one for you.
Hit me.
There is some new Bigfoot news.
Oh, excellent.
This story comes from The Independent. Dramatic footage claims to show new sighting of Sasquatch in Idaho.
Oh, let me bring that up. Yeah, you gave me this.
Yeah, take a look at that. I sent you the link.
Okay, I'm looking at it.
I mean, I'll describe it. It's sort of in shadow. It appears to be a tall person or creature. There's some brush in front of it. The clip only lasts a few seconds. How many frames would you say that is? Maybe. I mean, it's not even 2 seconds long.
It looks like one of my friends having a go at hunting, and he's out walking in the woods. It looks like it has shoes on. It looks.
Yeah, I just don't. I mean, there's just no detail there or anything. I mean, I don't know. It just
Bigfoot's wearing some Nikes.
Yeah, there's a lot of, it's well lit behind the creature, and he's in shadow, so you can't see any real details, I don't think. And I agree, when he lifts his foot in that one frame, it does look like a shoe. I'm trying to isolate that.
He looks depressed.
Yeah, he does look sad.
Like, man, I was up here and I dropped my contact lens. I just got those. It's somewhere up here.
Man, I like these shoes are so uncomfortable. They just don't make them in my size.
You know what? That's exactly how I looked when I was helping this kid try to find his glasses he'd lost in a field.
On Scouts.
Oh, what was that?
What was that?
Whatever I was watching on The Independent moved to the next article where
well, at least it wasn't a possum eating an ice cream under a blanket. That happened to me one night, if you remember.
I remember well.
Yeah. So you got anything else? I mean, I don't know what to make of that Bigfoot. It's so unclear. It's just like, okay. And there's only 60 frames maybe.
It's a dude looking for his contact lenses out in the wild. That's what it is.
It's just something like a kind of a freak thing. And then somebody said, hey, look, Steve looks like he's, Fred looks like he's
Bigfoot
in shadow like that. They just clicked that one thing out. So
we have another buddy. We have
another friend named Steve, and we won't mention his last name. But Steve M.
Yeah. And
that's who it looks like. He's a big hulking dude.
Yeah, he's a big hulking dude. He's even got the hair. Even looks like he's got his hair with that little
that little flip on the
side. Yeah. He's walking by.
Yeah. Steve, I really hope you're listening.
So I did see another article. This one out of Japan.
What you got?
So it looks like the U.S. government is asking some of its allies for some assistance in tracking and reporting any odd UAPs that they might see over their airspace. And Japan, in particular, is of interest because the thought being that it's likely, if China is doing this, that the proximity that Japan is to China, there'll be a higher likelihood of any testing that might be going on would be somewhere nearer to them. So Japan is just minimally stepping up and recently and said, Defense Secretary Taro Kono issued an unusual order to the self-defense forces to take visual records and analyze any such sightings.
I mean, I find that fascinating. Yeah. It sounds like they've taken it to another level, and they're taking it seriously. That they've even made that public, I find a little surprising. Now, is it the Japanese government that are the ones making it public? They may be a little more forthcoming about their information than our government when it comes to UFOs and UAPs.
It's an Asian site, so an Asian news site that I'm reading this off of. So I imagine that's probably the source of the...
Very neat, very neat.
Yeah.
I have a little bit of a follow-up with our episode we had last week, and we actually had this news. We kind of got sidetracked talking about all these other lake monsters.
As we do.
As we often do, and go down a rabbit hole or two while we're at it. This is a pretty recent news story. There's a Neil Gemmell from the University of Otago in New Zealand who has collected DNA from Scotland's Loch Ness. It suggests that the lake's monster might be a giant eel.
How big's giant? Like 10 feet? 20 feet?
It doesn't say.
3,000 feet?
He said in a news conference, the idea of a giant eel is at least plausible. The DNA project found no evidence to support the notion that the monster is a long-necked ancient reptile called plesiosaur, which I think we pretty well ruled that out the last time on the episode. I mean, it's an air breather, so you would see it a lot more often. You'd see it all the time.
Well, unless evolution had made it form gills.
I suppose that's possible. I find it highly unlikely that it's any remnant of something from 150 million years ago.
So let me get this straight. You seem to think that it's probably more likely that it's some toy sub with some wood putty put on it to make like Nessie.
Well, now that particular photograph, the surgeon's photo, is almost certainly a hoax. It's been explained and
by the people who perpetrated the hoax, including the surgeon.
Yeah, the photograph definitely is a fake, but it's hard to explain some of the really unusual sightings that some people have. I'm sure some seeing things under the water or something on the surface of the water from a distance has been misinterpreted. One thing, obviously, is the logs with the root system. If a tree falls into the water and then the root system is sticking up, it could, somebody tries to put that pattern in their mind and they know the legend of Loch Ness or one of these other lake monsters. And they, you can kind of say, hey, man, I saw it. Its head was coming out. And, the human mind wants to put together these patterns. But there could be a real mystery there. I don't know.
Particularly after, losing your glasses and having a couple bottles of whiskey, you might see something that's unusual out there.
Yeah, they said they found a surprisingly high amount of eel DNA in the waters of Loch Ness, but it's not clear whether that indicates a gigantic eel or just a lot of little ones.
Or maybe a lot of little ones that come together to form a big eel.
Yeah, who knows? All right. You got anything else for tonight?
Nah, it's a pretty light news week.
Yeah, it seems really quiet in the UFO and Bigfoot encrypted world right now.
Yeah, oddly quiet. Maybe it's the quiet before the storm.
I'm sure the sightings are still happening. I personally would like to see more UFO reports and more UFO stories that are not related to the Nimitz in the Navy. That seems to be the only mainstream stories we get. It'll be just another pilot or another expert, quote, quote, weighing in on the whole thing. There's nothing new there. There hasn't been anything new for quite a while. Before we get into tonight's main subject, just want to remind everyone to please rate and review the podcast wherever you listen. It helps other people find the show. Please do this. It would really help us out, and it'll help grow the show, and we can bring you more things that you love. Now, go to CosmicSponge.com because although the past 3 or 4 episodes, I said, hey, go there right now, and there's a shop, and then if perhaps one or more of you did go there, and you said, there's no shop there. I can't find no shop. But there is a shop there now. Jimmy finally got the store going, and Jimmy, thank you so much for putting the work into it. I know it's been a challenge. So on there right now, you can get a T-shirt that has the Cosmic Sponge logo on it. You can also order a Cosmic Sponge coffee mug. And I meant to tell you, Jimmy, these are really good mugs. My niece had went to Chicago a few months ago, and she got us 2 nice-looking Chicago mugs. Believe it or not, just probably 4 or 5 washes in the dishwasher, the logo disappeared. It is completely gone. We've washed the Cosmic Sponge, which is really nice graphic and everything on it. It's not faded or anything. It still looks just as good as it did the day you sent it to me.
Excellent.
That's what's on there now, right, Jimmy?
Right.
Why don't you go over anything else we might have on there?
Yeah, so I have samples coming for a water bottle, a Cosmic Sponge poster, both a paper one and a canvas one. I am making up things for a sandal, a beanbag chair, a hoodie. So we've got quite a few things coming. Got a lot of things in the pipe, but I want to make sure I get samples sent to me to make sure they look good, that they're going to be something that we're going to be proud to sell.
Mm-hmm.
So those, a couple samples on the way. The water bottle will probably be here within a week, and then if it's good, then we'll put that one up. And probably the posters will be next.
Nice. And you know, you get to see our artwork and everything. If you've been to the web page, you've seen our artwork. And we have a couple of different samples of artwork. So down the road, we hope to offer, you know, a choice, the astronaut or the two monkeys with one reaching out for the monolith, the sponge monolith. Yeah. That was my favorite.
should be good. I almost wanted the other monkey to be smacking his hand. Like, no, don't do that.
No, we don't need that. Yeah.
Don't touch it.
So anyway, yes, it's finally there. And I guess eventually we're going to have a couple other things on there to help support the show, like Patreon and Buy Me a Coffee and some things like that. They're not quite ready to go. So I know we've had several people reach out and ask how to support the show. Hey, how can I help you guys out? It'll be there soon. Thanks everyone for listening, and check it out. I hope you guys enjoy it. Maybe get some neat souvenirs. Lastly, be sure to check out our Facebook page and our Instagram. We typically have new content on Facebook just about every day. As Jimmy had mentioned, the news stories have been a little light lately, but sometimes I'll dig and maybe find an older story of interest and post it on there. But we try to update it every day, at least once, but usually 2 to 3 times a day. And Jimmy puts together some pretty funny Instagram. Check those things out, and we would greatly appreciate it. So let's move on to tonight's main topic. Without further ado, we're going to be talking about cattle mutilations.
Uh-oh.
That's right. We're going to be talking about something strange going on out there on the prairie, up there in the mountains, with our bovine friends.
Should we have like a gruesome warning, like, for sensitive people before we start talking about this?
Yeah, this might get a little gross. If you're sensitive about cattle mutilations or mutilation in general,
if
perhaps.
You got kids in the car, you might want to.
Kids in the car.
Skip this
right?
one.
I don't know. How gruesome are we going to get? I mean, I don't know.
I don't know. Pretty gross. Some of it.
Yeah, I guess so. Well, anyway, if you're squeamish or have small children in the car, be sure and tune in. I mean, you may want to skip this one.
Yeah, skip this one. Unless your kids are little psychos.
It's not going to be horrific, though. I mean, you know. And Jimmy, I think you've done a little legwork on this one. So why don't you kick us off on cattle mutilations?
Oddly enough, our story is not going to start with a cow. Now, throughout history, there have been mutilations going back hundreds of years. These include other animals, like sheep, for example, in and around London. But we want to talk about the modern cattle mutilation story, and that actually starts with a horse named Lady. Lady was an Appaloosa mare and went missing from its pasture on Harry King Ranch, located just 20 miles northeast of Alamosa, Colorado. 2 days after its body went missing, on September the 9th, 1967, the horse was found in a pasture, and the mystery surrounding her death would connect UFOs and cattle mutilations in popular culture, which hadn't previously existed, at least not at this level. You see, Lady's body was found 100 feet from where her last hoof prints were found, as if she'd been lifted from the ground and then discarded without leaving drag marks or any other indications of being transported to her final resting place. Then there was also the lack of blood. Apparently there was no blood anywhere around the horse's body. There was also exhaust marks on the ground around her body, and in the air there was a sweet odor like incense, which contrasted with the formaldehyde-like odor coming from the horse's corpse. Nellie Lewis, the horse's owner, would hire experts to examine the body. The mystery deepened, just as the story entered the local press, as well as spreading by word of mouth. Radioactive readings on a Geiger counter, claims of UFO sightings in the area, and a veterinarian's inability to explain the lack of blood, organs, and seemingly unusual, precise cuts on the flesh provided the perfect backdrop for an out-of-this-world conspiracy.
One source I found said that the horse's name was Lady, and that Lady's head and neck had been skinned and defleshed.
Correct. And there's a lot of other little mysteries that surround this particular tale of Lady, which make it pretty interesting.
I found that to be very strange. And I guess I'd heard that before on one of these documentaries that, UFO or whatever. When we started digging into this thing, and if somebody listens to the very first episode, they're like, oh, he doesn't believe in cattle meat. I'll admit, man, I just kind of blew them off, didn't really think a whole lot about it until we started digging into this thing. There's some really weird things that have happened. The horse's head is, the flesh is removed. There's nothing there from the neck and the head up. There's no blood. There's no tracks. There's, a few organs missing from inside. I mean, it's just a very weird... even the horse's tracks do not lead to the spot. They're like 100 feet away, right?
Exactly. So,
it's just so weird.
Upon first inspection. But as you get deeper and deeper into the story, and you follow it all the way back to its beginning, and you fill in some gaps in the story that's being told by people who are maybe enthralled with the whole idea of a conspiracy or the involvement of UFOs, it sort of evens out, in my mind, a little bit more. Now, it's worth mentioning that there were several sightings of UFOs that night that Lady went missing by several people in the area. That I found pretty curious, but then you find out that Lady wasn't actually found till 2 days after she went missing. You find that they actually tracked her, and there were 3 horses involved in this disappearance, 2 which came back to the ranch, and looking at the hoof prints in the ground, which it had been raining, so the ground was soft, and they could really follow the hoof prints, it appeared as if the horses were all running back to the ranch, and then something cut off Lady from the other 2 and turned her in a different direction and ran her off to where she was finally found. The local sheriff said that he thought she'd been struck by lightning and killed that way, though weather reports at that time did not indicate any thunderstorms in the area.
That would rule that out, I would assume. I know there can be stray lightning strikes from time to time, but it's extremely rare without, weather.
Now, I don't know how ranchers are because I'm not a rancher. At least I play one on TV, but they left that horse laying in that field for a long time. The vet that examined the body did not get to it till weeks after the horse had died. So by that time, bugs had already had their way with it, birds, carrion birds, and I'm sure other small scavengers. So I don't know how accurate, a vet can get in terms of trying to come to conclusions about what had, killed this horse. Though eventually they did do an autopsy and discover that it had been shot in the hind leg with 2 small caliber bullets and had an infection. And
probably like a 22 or something.
Yeah, and that may have contributed to its death, but that's speculation.
You did mention the Alamosa County Sheriff Ben Phillips, who said he thought that the death was probably due to a lightning strike. Well, he never bothered to even visit the site at all. That's just him saying, it's probably struck by lightning. Okay. He never saw the horse.
That's right.
It's true that the horses did lay in the field for a while before the veterinarian finally got a look at it. There were some very weird circumstances around it. Now, did you see that the Condon Committee sent an investigator to check this out?
I did see that.
So, listeners, if you're wondering, if you're just joining us and haven't listened to all of our episodes yet, the Condon Committee was commissioned in 1966 by the U.S. Air Force. It was a bunch of investigators and scientists out of the University of Colorado. We cover it very extensively in the History of UFOs Declassified Part 2. It's Episode 4. So if you want to go back and listen to that and learn a little bit more about what the Condon Committee is. Needless to say, these scientists were very skeptical. I looked up the case. It was case number 32, Would you like to hear some of that?
I would love to hear some of that because I did not follow up on the Condon report. That's okay. On me because, when I hear anything in the Condon report, I'm like, well, those guys were really...
I'm going to do it. I love looking up the old documents.
Yeah, but I just don't trust anything in the Condon report just because of the way the whole thing was approached.
But I love looking up these cases from the 60s and the 50s because of that. I mean, there's so much documentation compared to modern ones.
I was just thinking, modern day times, you have all kinds of good stuff like, it's aliens!
Aliens!
It's
aliens, y'all! Yeah, that was great. All right, here we go. Case number 32, fall 1967. Investigator was Wadsworth Eyre. And here's the abstract. The death of the horse was popularly believed to be related to UFO sightings, but professional investigation disclosed nothing unusual in the condition of the carcass. No significant conclusions could be derived from numerous reports of UFO sightings. So here's the background. During the early fall 1967, news of a series of events that were popularly held to be related filtered in to the Colorado Project. And of course, they're talking about the Condon Committee. One such event had been the death of a horse under allegedly mysterious circumstances a month before. This death had become associated in the public mind with recent UFO sightings in the area. The horse, owned by a woman and pastured on her brother's ranch, had not come in for water one day and had been found dead 2 days later. It was reported that all the flesh and skin had been removed from his head and neck down to a straight cut just ahead of the shoulder, and that crushed vegetation, strange depressions in the ground, and dark exhaust marks had been found nearby. The owner of the horse was a correspondent for a local newspaper, and a spate of releases had rapidly inflated public interest in the case. A few days later, word came through that a second dead horse had been found. Amid persistent rumors of unreported UFOs, it was decided, I guess when they say unreported UFOs, they mean Project Blue Book or something, which was active at the time. It was decided that the project investigators should go to the area. So here's the investigation. The area about the carcass had been trampled by several hundred visitors. The investigators therefore considered it not worthwhile to try to investigate anything at the site except the carcass. When they learned that no veterinarian had examined it, they called in a veterinarian who examined the carcasses of both horses. His essential findings were the horse's carcass was extremely old for an autopsy, but there was evidence suggesting a severe infection in a hind leg that could have disabled or killed the animal. There was evidence also of a knife cut in the neck, possibly made by someone who found the horse hopelessly sick. Absence of nerve tissues and viscera was normal for a carcass dead several weeks. Magpies and other birds ordinarily cannot peck through the skin of a horse, but they will eat the flesh and skin if they can get into it. In this case, they evidently had taken advantage of the cut and removed all accessible skin and flesh from the neck and head before the carcass had been found. The second horse carcass showed evidence that death had resulted from encephalitis. It had been reported that the forest ranger with civil defense training had found a high level of radioactivity near the exhaust mark. When questioned by an investigator, he said that his meter had indicated only slight activity 2 weeks after the carcass had been found. The investigators concluded that the activity he had measured on his simple survey instrument had been no greater than normal background radiation they measured 3 weeks later. Conclusions: there was no evidence to support the assertion that the horse's death was associated in any way with abnormal causes. And it goes on to talk about a bunch of UFO sightings. Here's one from a service station attendant and former aircraft gunner reported 3 sightings in 10 years in the area. 1966, 2 boys, 13 and 17, were traveling north when they saw a bright light in the road. UFO kept ahead of them for about 20 miles, then disappeared. Early fall 1967, the owner of the horse mentioned with her husband was driving west. They saw 3 pulsating red-green lights pass over, moving generally southwest. After 5 to 10 minutes, the third object seemed to explode, emitting a yellow flash. A second flash near the ground, a puff of smoke. Witnesses observed for 10 minutes. Several fragments were seen to fall to the ground after the second explosion. They looked for the wreckage. They saw nothing of interest. The data on this sighting was sent to Major Quintanilla, who reported that no satellite re-entries had been seen or predicted at that reported time. Another couple reported several sightings. Yeah. So, like I said, it just goes through a few of these sightings. It's interesting how long they were able to observe these. Here's one in the fall of 67. 10 minutes before dark, two ranchers driving west saw a small cigar-shaped cloud vertically oriented in a sky that had only one other cloud in it. The cigar was about the size of a thumb at arm's length. Yeah, everybody hold their thumbs up at arm's length so you can get a feel for it. It was slightly boat-tailed at the bottom, and its outlines were not sharp.
Well, if your arm is like a...
Bigfoot?
Yeah, I mean...
But then you're going to have a big thumb, too, so it's going to be in proportion.
Well, what if you have a normal-sized hand and you have an arm that's like 23 miles long? It could be...
Then you know what? It's just not going to work for you.
It's just gonna be a small cloud.
You're going to be a UFO. You got those kind of conditions. So. Yeah, so his summary on this was none of these sightings were considered to be current or strange enough to warrant detailed investigations. And that's it. That was the conclusion. That was the Condon Committee's investigation of this particular horse mutilation.
That sounds actually very reasonable to me.
Well, by the time they showed up, I mean, there was really very little to investigate other than eyewitness testimony, which, you know, no one ever gives very much credence to, probably rightly so.
Yeah, so eventually, Dr. Wallace Leary, operator of a local veterinarian clinic, obtained the skeleton from the owner, boiled it, cut it in sections, then boiled it to get the bones. At that point, that's when he located the 2 bullet holes in the left pelvis and right thigh bones. Conclusion there, at the end of the day, seems that it was more likely vandals, not ETs, who had brought poor old lady to her end. And they called her Snippy, but Snippy was actually the mother of that horse.
There was actually 2 students from Alamosa State College who confessed to sneaking out into the pasture and shooting the horse several weeks after the case was publicized. Yeah, I don't know what their names were.
That I didn't know. So I guess they tried to sell the bones back in 2006, I believe. No takers. They wanted to sell it for $50,000. Now I think Snippy's bones reside somewhere in a warehouse, in a big old box, like the Ark of the Covenant at the end of Raiders of the Lost Ark. It's sitting in a warehouse.
A government warehouse?
Yeah, probably government warehouse, because it's a... When I was doing this research, I found it interesting that there was a lot of suspicion on part of the cattle ranchers of the government. And they...
Oh, well, that doesn't surprise me at all.
Particularly at that time in history, the way they characterized it was there was a lot of distrust of the federal government because of the way the Vietnam War went. So that was in part. Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. This is what I read, folks.
Well, here's what I think. I mean, if we want to talk about distrust of cattle ranchers of the federal government, if you live in a place like Wyoming, where most of these cattle mutilations happen, Montana, most of these western states, pretty remote, sparsely populated, chances are you don't want to be around a lot of people. And you definitely don't want anyone coming in to tell you what to do, such as the FBI or the IRS or any other government entity, the Department of Agriculture, trying to tell you you can't, move a creek or something like that. I mean, they don't like being told things, Damn government. I hear them now. I hear them like that around here. So.
Exactly. Regardless, the Bureau of Land Management had to stop flying their helicopters because they were afraid that these guys were going to shoot them down with their rifles. I guess they were taking pot shots at these low-flying helicopters that were doing land management activities, getting counts of elk and stuff from the air or, doing other assessments. So they went to the government and said, other agencies in the government said, hey, you need to come in here and put this to rest. Whatever's causing these cattle mutilations, it's not our helicopters.
Right. Yeah, the issue did continue. I mean, there's some other big cases out there. I do know I have a piece here where it says in 1975 there was a lot of public concern regarding the issue, and so Senator Floyd K. Haskell contacted the FBI, asked them for help. He had claimed there had been 130 mutilations in Colorado alone. Further reports across 9 states. By 1979, the FBI indicated that according to the investigations by the New Mexico State Police, there had been an estimated 8,000 mutilations in Colorado, causing approximately $1 million in damage. At this point, let's talk a little bit about some of the physical characteristics. What makes a cattle mutilation different than just my cow died out in the field? And these are some of the common things. In most cases, mutilation wounds appear to be clean and carried out surgically. Mutilated animals are sometimes, though not always, reported to have been drained of blood and show no sign of blood in the immediate area or around their wounds. According to Howard Burgess, nearly 90% of mutilated cattle are between 4 and 5 years old. In some cases, strange marks or imprints near the site can be found. In the famous Snippy case, or lady that we just talked about, there was an absolute absence of tracks in a 100-foot radius of the carcass. Even the horse's own tracks disappeared within 100 feet of the body. But within this radius, several small holes were found seemingly punched in the ground, and 2 bushes were absolutely flattened. In New Mexico, in June of 1976, a trail of suction-like impressions was found leading from a mutilated 3-year-old cow. The indentions were in a tripod form, 4 inches in diameter, 28 inches apart, and disappeared 500 feet from the dead cow. Similar incidents were reported in the area in 1978. Lab reports carried out on some of the mutilated animals have shown unusually high or unusually low levels of vitamins or minerals in the tissue samples, and the presence of chemicals not normally found in animals. However, not all mutilated animals display these anomalies, and those that do have slightly different anomalies from one another. On account of the time between death and necropsy and a lack of background information on specific cattle, investigators have often found it impossible to determine if these variations are connected to the animal's deaths or not. There's one case documented by the New Mexico Police and the FBI of an 11-month-old bull belonging to Mr. Manuel Gomez of Dulce, New Mexico, and it was found mutilated on March 24, 1978. It displayed classic mutilation signs, including the removal of the rectum and sex organs and what appeared to be a sharp and precise instrument, and its internal organs were found to be inconsistent with a normal case of death followed by predation. Both the liver and the heart were white and mushy. Both organs had the texture and consistency of peanut butter, and that was according to Gabriel L. Valdez, New Mexico Police. The animal's heart, as well as bone and muscle samples, were sent to Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory for microscopic and bacteriological studies, while samples from the animal's liver were sent to 2 separate private laboratories. Los Alamos detected the presence of naturally occurring bacteria in the heart, but was unable to reach any conclusions because of the possibility that the bacteria presented post-mortem contamination. No microscopic changes of pathological significance were found in the heart tissue. Samples from the liver were found to be completely devoid of copper and contained 4 times the normal level of zinc, potassium, and phosphorus. The scientists performing the analysis were unable to explain these anomalies. Blood samples taken at the scene were reported to be light pink in color and did not clot after several days, while the animal's hide was found to be unusually brittle for a fresh death. The animal was estimated to have been dead for 5 hours, and the flesh underneath was found to be discolored. None of the laboratories were able to report any firm conclusions on the cause of blood or tissue damage. At the time, it was suggested that a burst of radiation may have been used to kill the animal, blowing apart its red blood cells in the process. This hypothesis was later discarded, as subsequent reports from Los Alamos Scientific Laboratory later confirmed the presence of anticoagulants in the samples. But why was that? Why are there anticoagulants in the tissue samples or blood samples sent to these labs?
Are you asking me?
Yeah, I'm talking to you. I'm looking at you, man.
I flunked out
with that.
I flunked out of my medical school training.
Well, I'm not big on biology either, but I mean, why? I mean, that just doesn't sound like a natural death. I mean, again, more I dig into this, and I know there's just a lot of cases that probably can be explained, probably many of them, but there are some really strange things here. Why does anticoagulants exist in the blood of this cow? Unless somebody was trying to perpetuate some kind of hoax or something. It just seems very strange. These strange, unusual chemicals in the liver tissue samples that shouldn't even be there. The U.S. government had some explanations that after they investigated this for a while, the FBI did take over cattle mutilation subject. They were granted jurisdiction under Title 18. The investigation was dubbed Operation Animal Mutilation. Pretty creative title, I thought.
So I'm looking up here. A problem in the coagulation of the blood, sweet clover disease of cattle.
Okay.
The attention of research workers on animal diseases was directed some years ago to the occurrence of losses among cattle which were fed on hay made from sweet clover. Such forage has been found to be of poor quality, for it was spoiled, moldy, or damaged, and it's evident that sweet clover acquires specific disease-producing properties when it spoils in the curing process. It goes on to say it's basically creates a disease that causes hemorrhaging and death.
In May of 1979, the case was passed to the FBI. The investigation was funded by a $44,170 grant from the Law Enforcement Assistance Administration and was headed by FBI agent Kenneth Rommel. I wonder if it's any relation to Erwin Rommel, the famous German general, the Desert Fox.
Or Doug Rommel, he's
Doug Rommel.
He works at the local coffee store.
Down at Joe's coffee shop.
Yeah, I think
so. Here's the 5 key objectives that they identified, and when the FBI took on this case in 1979, to determine the reliability of information on which the grant was based, which entailed gathering as much information as possible about the cases reported in New Mexico prior to May of 1979, to determine the cause of as many mutilations as possible, especially those reported in New Mexico, to determine if livestock mutilations as described constitute a major law enforcement problem. If it is shown that the mutilation phenomena is not a law enforcement problem, to recommend that no further law enforcement investigations be funded.
There you go.
Rommel's final report, released in June of 1980, was 297 pages long. In report's introduction, Rommel stated, according to some estimates, 10,000 head of cattle have been mysteriously mutilated. However, the report concluded that the mutilations were predominantly the result of natural predation, but did acknowledge that some cases contained anomalies that could not be accounted for by conventional wisdom. The FBI was unable to identify any individuals responsible for the mutilations. Details of the investigation are now available under the Freedom of Information Act. The released material includes correspondence from Rommel, where he states that most credible sources have attributed this damage to normal predation and scavenger activity. So that was the summary that they had. New Mexico State Patrolman Gabe Valdez, who by the time of the Rommel report had investigated dozens of cattle mutilation cases, he told Christopher O'Brien, another investigator, that during the 6 to 8 months when Rommel was actively investigating the mutilations in New Mexico, the state suddenly became quiet, and very few, if any, true mutilations were being reported to officials. Valdez was convinced that Rommel was never able to investigate a single high-strange case because the mutilations moved their operations to other parts of the West. Rommel was disgusted. He was a former FBI bank robbery expert and was said to be disgusted by dead necrotic cows and chose to let others do the actual investigations while he waited upwind in the car. Doesn't sound like they chose the right man for the job, right?
Not at all.
And they said that during this period, Western Canada became especially hard hit. That during the 6 to 8 months of Rommel's investigations, that an RCPM investigator, Corporal Lynn Lauber of the Calgary Detachment, who was in charge of the Canadian mutilation probe, investigated numerous high-strange cases. When Rommel's final report was released to the public, Lauber answered with an inquiry by investigator Tommy Bland, "I find it difficult to understand how Rommel could make a statement such as this without ever having personally witnessed a real mutilation firsthand." He also stated that, "I would like to see Rommel write off our confirmed cases as due to predators."
Rommel can't help it, man. He's squeamish around blood.
Apparently so.
Yeah.
So that was the FBI's involvement in cattle mutilations. The ATF also investigated somewhat. The ATF investigation was headed by ATF agent Donald Flickinger. The New Mexico investigation was headed by, again, Officer Gabe Valdez of New Mexico State Patrol, with the assistance of Cattle Inspector Jim Dyard and Officer Howard Johnson, not the same Howard Johnson of the ice cream parlor, of the New Mexico Department of Game and Fish. So what do you got for me now?
Well, I found the satanic cult stuff pretty interesting.
Oh, yeah. Let's check that out.
Since you mentioned Flickinger.
Okay, hey, let's take a quick break.
All right.
Don't talk about Mothman.
Normally I'd be talking about Mothman about right now, but I need to go pee in my bathroom that's decorated with Mothman paraphernalia. I'll be right back.
You were gone a long time.
I had to go lock the chickens up. We've got a cat. I went to go lock the chickens up the other night, and there's this, one of the chickens was out of the coop, and it was huddled down. It was dark already. It was huddled down right outside the gate that gets into where the coop area is. It had gotten out and hadn't figured out a way to get back in. And it was just sitting there shivering. And I got my little light. I'm like, "What's up with you little buddy?" And then I pan over to where it's looking, and there's a cat sitting there like it's ready to pounce. And it just looks up at me.
Licking its chops.
The cat doesn't move. It just looks up at me and goes, "Just turn your back, man. Just turn your back for one more minute. Everything's fine here."
Yeah. This isn't the chicken you're looking for.
That's right. So I got to be careful. Since we were talking about Donald E. Flickinger of the Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms Division, he had been contacted by a well-known UFO expert who had received a letter from an inmate at Fort Leavenworth. His name was Kenneth Bankston. And although he said he wasn't a member of a cult, he had information about one. He was transferred to a jail in Minnesota, which was a minimum security prison, where Flickinger interrogated him for a month. Bankston's story indicated that a satanic cult in Texas called the Sons of Satan, whose primary purpose was to create hell on earth, was full of this wealthy cult-leading right-wing white supremacist leader called Howard.
Just Howard?
Howard. In quotes, just Howard. Maybe like Howard the Duck. I don't know.
Or kind of like Cher. Just the one
it
name.
It could be a Sting. Bono.
Yeah.
And Howard. The cult was focused on animal sacrifices, but human sacrifices was their ultimate goal. So Bankston describes the cattle mutilation process. He describes it as the cow was first shot with tranquilizer, and then the members would walk up to the cow without leaving any tracks by using these large pieces of cardboard. And they didn't want to leave any tracks because they wanted the public to believe that UFOs were involved in the mutilations. So if there was any indication on the ground, like if there's snow on the ground, they would use blowtorches to create a circle around the cattle. And when they got close enough to the cow, they would place a stimulant, like amyl nitrate, against its nose in order to speed up its bodily functions. And then they use a veterinarian's syringes to withdraw all the blood. And very detailed in how he's describing this. And finally, they would cut out all the body parts and organs they wanted to use in their ritual sacrifices. Based upon this information, U.S. Attorney Robert Renner of Minneapolis ordered a full investigation. After this, a second inmate, also Leavenworth, speaks out because Bankston points them in the direction of this other inmate, a Dan Dugan. Dugan's transferred out of the high-security Texas prison he was serving time in, and the two inmates were kept apart and interrogated, and everything sort of lined up. They tried to trip him up, but the stories were identical. They gave a list of various people that they thought were involved in the cults, as well as a list of people that were going to be targeted by the cult for assassination. Some of these were important people, officials like, let's see, blah, 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 blah. I'm reading through this really quick. Bankston and Dugan also provided Flickinger with a list of 14 people they said were involved in the cult. Flickinger gave these names to other law enforcement officials, and he found out that many of them were already being investigated for possible links to satanic cults and other criminal behavior.
There had been a few sightings, though. Interesting sightings. And, of course, there wasn't a whole lot of corroboration about just the two inmates, but appeared to be somewhat unrelated. But who knows? Maybe spread some stories around and it just got around that that's how it was done. But there were a few reports during this time that there were menacing groups prowling around mutilation sites. In September 1975, a Forestry Service employee in Blaine County, Idaho, reported seeing a group of people in black hooded robes. Several cattle were found mutilated in the area the following day. On October 9, 1975, a motorist on U.S. Highway 95 in northern Idaho, in an area of frequent cattle mutilation, reported to police that some 15 masked individuals formed a roadblock with linked arms, forcing him to turn around. Since the beginning of the cult hypothesis, law enforcement agents in several states and provinces, including Alberta, Idaho, Montana, and Iowa, have reported evidence implicating cults in several instances of the cattle mutilations.
Well, they think the whole thing was concocted because our two buddies, both of them, escaped from jail in this lower security prison. It's minimum security prison.
Ever recaptured?
They were. Bankston escaped jail and was quickly recaptured. The next day, Dugan escaped and was caught a month later. They also discovered that Howard, that they were talking about, they discovered exactly who Howard was. I guess they got a last name out of him. And he was serving jail time at the time that supposedly he was going around leading this cult and doing these nefarious activities.
And of course, I've not done any research on this, but you just bringing up the cult thing. I remember the satanic panic of the 80s.
Yeah.
You know, there was this idea, it was rumored, I think Geraldo Rivera got in on it, spreading all this word that there was all these satanic cults running around, super secretive cults like Rosemary's Baby kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And that, they were doing human sacrifices, that perhaps some of the missing children or, missing people around the world were victims of this satanic cult. The FBI did a very extensive investigation. They could find no evidence of any kind of cults existing at the levels that had been suggested by some people in the media and some other fearmongers.
Yeah, it's crazy. The satanic panic was a moral panic consisting of over 12,000 unsubstantiated cases of satanic ritual abuse starting in the United States in the 1980s. And the panic originated in 1980 with the publication of Michelle Remembers, a book co-written by Canadian psychiatrist Lawrence Pasder and his patient and then future wife, which used the discredited practice of recovered memory therapy to make sweeping, lurid claims about satanic ritual abuse involving Smith.
Yeah. Well, regressive hypnosis, in other words.
Yeah.
And there was another investigator, though, that had suggested, and more than one, that it's hypothesized that some cattle mutilations are the result of just deviant behavior by human beings. The bulk of mutilations, it's suggested, is the result of predation and other natural processes. And those anomalies that can't be explained away are likely the work of humans who derive pleasure or sexual stimulation from mutilating animals. Human attacks against animals are a recognized phenomenon. There have been many recorded cases around the world and many convictions. Typically, the victims are cats, dogs, and other family pets, and the actions of humans are usually limited to acts of cruelty such as striking, burning, or beating animals. However, attacks have also been recorded against larger animals, including sheep, cows, and horses. Humans, particularly those with sociopathic disorders, have been found to have mutilated animals in elaborate ways using knives or surgical instruments. In April of 1979, C. Hibbs of the New Mexico State Veterinary Diagnostic Laboratory spoke before a hearing chaired by Senator Harrison Schmitt. Hibbs testified that mutilation fell into three categories, one of which was animals mutilated by humans. But FBI records did not record the percentage of mutilated animals that fell into this category. And that's a pretty reasonable assumption, considering the two students from that state college had admitting to shooting that horse that kicked it all off, Snippy, or Lady or Snippy. They admitted they'd shot it. People are mean. Some people are just cruel.
Some people suck.
Yeah. I mean, that's, I live somewhat in the country, and I know guys when I was growing up and that would shoot even out of season or anything. If they saw an unusual animal, they would just shoot it. They would kill it, for no reason other than, hey, I killed. Like, for instance, there's a lot of wild turkeys here now in my little neck of the woods here. Years ago, there were none around. And I remember one of my neighbor kids, I heard that he saw a turkey in the woods. What did he do? And it's summertime. He shot it. I mean, it wasn't in season or anything. They just shot it and left it laying.
Uh-oh, you're outing your neighbor.
Yeah, well, we won't go any more details about that.
You're reporting a crime.
I live in the country somewhat. I mean, not way out in the country, but, I'm just aware that people do have deviant behaviors, and they'll see animals and even cows if they think they can get away with it. And especially out west where it's much more sparsely populated and stuff, I could most definitely see some people doing some weird things with cows and
right.
Weird
things with cows stuck in fences. Hey, okay, so here's what I want to do. Let's run down the list of possibilities that explain cattle mutilations, but before we do that, I want to add one more to the list, because when I did my research, I went looking specifically for this, and I was not disappointed. Cattle mutilations and Bigfoot.
Oh, I never thought about Bigfoot.
There is a program that came out in 2006, a documentary on Bigfoot and cattle mutilation. So you can go and watch this documentary, and it brings out this whole idea that Sasquatch is out there mutilating cows with laser scalpels. I don't know if they're using laser scalpels, but
why not?
Why not? If you're going to go down that road.
All right. Can I ask one question? You said you did a little bit of research on this.
Yeah.
What has led anyone to believe that Bigfoot is responsible for any cattle mutilation?
Well,
I mean,
I didn't hear anything.
There was a sighting of Bigfoot. Someone saw Bigfoot killing a cow. I mean,
no, because
what led? Was there tracks? I mean, usually these cattle mutilations, there's no tracks around.
I think it's because
on the weird ones,
right.
What they consider.
I think it's because they ruled out predators. They ruled out UFOs because that's completely ludicrous, and then they ruled out humans, and then all that was left was Chupacabra and Bigfoot. And everybody knows Chupacabra is allergic to beef. That's why they eat pork.
It's not true. In South America, it is quite often associated with cattle mutilations and livestock deaths.
That's a
Chupacabra.
That's a south of the border Chupacabra. I'm talking about the American Chupacabra.
I didn't know there was an American Chupacabra.
Well, there is now.
Yeah. And we'll talk about the Chupacabra one day.
One day. Don't know when.
We promise.
But so we've got Bigfoot, humans, UFOs, predators, and just normal, regular predators, and Bigfoot. Did I say Bigfoot already?
You said Bigfoot. We talked about it.
All right, so we got four of them. We got four possibilities here, like satanic cult members or wacky humans, regular predators, Bigfoot, UFOs.
Yeah, here's some of let's look at natural causes. There's many unconventional explanations that have been put forward to explain cattle mutilations. A variety of scientists, veterinary workers, and knowledgeable observers, including farmers and other agricultural workers, have suggested some more conventional ideas, most of which revolve around the hypothesis that mutilated animals died of natural causes and were subjected to known terrestrial phenomena, including the action of predators, parasites, and scavengers. Okay, so here's one phenomenon. It's missing or mutilated mouth, lips, anus, and genitalia are explained. The contraction of missing, damaged areas due to dehydration. The actions of small scavengers and burrowing parasites seeking to enter or consume the body in areas where the skin is at its thinnest. And that's absolutely true. The small predators will go for, birds for instance, will peck the eyes out and they'll get to the soft tissues behind the eyes. The tongue is another soft, usually the tongue will hang out with these large animals when they fall over. Those usually get eaten away by the smaller predators because, and the genitalia, udders on the cows, if it's a female, all the soft tissues get eaten away by the smaller predators because they can't really bite through the hide. Also, insects will typically start on the soft tissues first too. Missing, mutilated eyes and soft internal organs are explained as the action of carrion feeding insects such as blowflies, carrion birds, vultures, just covered that, toward the animal's eyes. And then insects enter the body through the openings in the mouth and the anus in order to feed on soft internal organs. The reason the organs are becoming mushy or disappear, for instance, is they're very soft tissue compared to muscle that's around the cattle or the bones or the hard things, the hide and those sort of things. So once these soft tissues have been eliminated and predators get inside, particularly insects, they will attack the organs first because, once again, it's soft tissue.
Yeah, so this is interesting. Yeah. Blowfish and other insects whose eggs can... Blowflies, I'm sorry.
You said blowfish.
Blowfish is the crazy things that you don't eat because they die if you cut it wrong. Blowflies and other insects whose eggs can hatch in 10 hours. It's crazy. In 10 hours. Fill the wounds with maggots, which can expose clean, dry bone in just a few hours more. So within 12 hours, you can have bone exposed just off of the insects alone. Nothing else but the insects. That's crazy.
The absence of blood is explained as blood pooling on the lowest points of the body, where it will break down into basic organic components. And also that the blood may be an explanation for the external blood that is external to the body of the wound is most definitely being consumed by insects or reduced by solar desiccation. And that makes a fair amount of sense, especially when some of these animals haven't been found for a couple of days. Now, they did, of course, there was a couple of cases where they found within a few hours. Surgical incisions in the skin are explained as tears in the skin created when it is stretched by post-mortem bloat and or dehydration cause the animal's hide to shrink and split, often in linear cuts. And they say possibly incisions caused by scavengers and predators exasperated by the bloating. Like it's already tight, maybe it splits a little bit, and then the predator widens it. This hypothesis of natural phenomenon for most mutilation characteristics has been validated by a number of experiments, including one cited by longtime scientific skeptic Robert T. Carroll, conducted by the Washington County Sheriff's Department in Arkansas. In the experiment, the body of a recently deceased cow was left in a field and observed for 48 hours. During the 48 hours, post-mortem bloating was reported to have caused incision-like tears in the cow's skin that matched the surgical cuts, quote, surgical, quotes reported on mutilated cows, while actions of blowflies and maggots reportedly matched the soft tissue damage observed in mutilated cows. And there's explanations of other experiments and stuff, but they all pretty much... In other words, they can recreate it in a controlled environment. They can recreate these anomalies. Now, one thing I didn't see mentioned in this sort of skeptical analysis or natural explanation is some of the strange chemicals and minerals that are found or not found that normally would be in some of the tissue samples.
Yeah, well, cows eat all kinds of stuff. You ever seen a cow eat?
Yes, I have.
It eats a ton of stuff. So, yeah, I read through this paper out of the Canadian Veterinary Journal titled Maggots, Mutilations, and Myth Patterns of Postmortem Scavenging of the Bovine Carcass by P. Nick Nation and Elizabeth S. Williams. And it, in detail, pretty much goes through exactly what you said and explains what happens out in the wild when a cow dies. And just as an example, I don't know that you can equate these two, but it seems reasonable to me. But then again, I'm not a doctor. I flunked out of med school. One person dies every 36 seconds in the United States from cardiovascular disease. That's one disease. 655,000 Americans alone die every year. That's a lot more than 10,000 cows, okay? So I'm just putting this out there. That's just one disease. How many diseases do cows get where they just fall over dead? You know, I mean, they're out in the wild. They're eating stuff. Maybe they're inbred and, you know, they're walking around in circles and forget what it's like to eat. I don't know. But there's all kinds of things that can make a cow fall over dead. And then you have all of this normal post-mortem stuff occur that people aren't familiar with. They don't see it often enough, and they're not vets, and they don't go in and do the research. And then the only reasonable explanation is UFOs or Bigfoot.
Well, I think it's one of those cases, and just while we're on this, there's some other things I want to go over, but I do think it's one of those situations where, you know, someone sees a UFO and then the next night, and it gets out or it's in the paper. You know, like for instance, the other day, remember a couple episodes ago, I've seen a couple of articles in my local paper about the Bigfoot. People, you know, some locals hearing the sound, the howls or whatever. And I would venture to say that there's probably people out there that have drove down to that area. I probably should do the same. And drive to that area and park nearby or something, or where they think it's coming from. And they'll probably hear who knows what. And in their mind, they'll think, man, I heard that Bigfoot howl. And it's the same thing with lights in the sky. So, you know, people start reporting UFOs in an area, in a region, and suddenly there's a lot more UFO reports because they're seeing them too. Or maybe they saw something last night that looked a little weird, and they're like, you know what, I bet that was one of those UFOs. You know, those sort of things just happen. That's not to say that there aren't UFOs and there aren't flying saucers and things, but it's sort of like a bandwagon effect. I don't know the right word for it, but...
Dogs and cats living together, mass hysteria.
Yeah, I mean, not necessarily hysteria, but maybe one level below that, you know? And so there were some UFOs around. UFOs were very popular in the 60s, lots of talk about them, and then here's these mutilated cows. And that was, you know, really strange description of how they found the horse. So, you know, going along with some of the locals reporting UFOs, you know, I could see where you'd make that connection. For one thing, it's like all this mysterious stuff, like the mashed down bushes. I bet that's where the UFO landed. No tracks around it. You know, why is that? They used anti-gravity device. I don't know. It's easy to go down that road and start piecing things together and creating a narrative for what happened to these animals. That's the reasonable explanation. But we would be remiss if we didn't mention that there are theories about the government or military experimentation is what is causing cattle mutilations. There was an article published in 1997 by Charles T. Oliphant called Dead Cows I've Known. He has the idea that cattle mutilations are the result of covert research into emerging cattle diseases and the possibility that they could be transmitted to humans. And additionally, in 2002, National Institute of Discovery Science report relates eyewitness testimony of two Cache County, Utah police officers. The area had seen many unusual cattle deaths, and ranchers had organized armed patrols to surveil the unmarked aircraft, which they claimed were associated with livestock deaths. The police witnesses claimed to have encountered several men in an unmarked U.S. Army helicopter in 1976 at a small community airport in Cache County. The witnesses asserted that after this heated encounter, cattle mutilations in the region ceased for about 5 years. So in other words, they're saying that the government is flying unmarked helicopters around and mutilating cattle to study cattle diseases and the possibility that they could be transmitted to humans. Biochemist Colm Kelleher, who has investigated several purported mutilations firsthand, argues that the mutilations are most likely clandestine U.S. government effort to track the spread of mad cow disease and related diseases such as scrappy. A brief sampling of cases, April 8, 1979, 3 police officers in Dulce, New Mexico reported a mysterious aircraft which resembled a U.S. military helicopter hovering around a site following a wave of alleged mutilation, which claimed 16 cows. On July 15th, 1974, 2 unregistered helicopters and a white helicopter and a black twin-engine aircraft were reported to have opened fire on Robert Smith Jr. while he was driving his tractor on his farm in Honey Creek, Iowa. The attack followed a rash of alleged mutilations in the area and across a nearby border in Nebraska. The reports of helicopter involvement have been used to explain why some cattle appear to have been dropped from considerable heights, which is another aspect of cattle mutilation. What do you think about that?
So I was just looking up a few things here. So the government has paid $10,000 for the opportunity for you to go to a cactus theater where you can commune with a saguaro cactus for an hour in the middle of the desert. They've also paid $146 million so that federal employees could upgrade to business class from economy class. $120 million in disability and retirement to dead people. $35 million to 118 medical clinics in the United States that actually don't exist. $30 million to help develop mango farming. $27 million to teach people in Morocco to design and create pottery. $5.2 million on hair care products. $2.6 million on advertising to encourage Chinese prostitutes to drink responsibly. They also paid $2.5 million for a 30-second commercial during a Super Bowl, which was so bad and so poorly produced, it was banned from television immediately after airing.
What was that?
They don't say the specific one, but it's considered the worst Super Bowl commercial. I'm sure you could look it up. My
God, I got to find that. We got to post that.
Okay, the worst Super Bowl commercial. So here's my point. If the government wanted cows, they would just print the money and buy them. They wouldn't send out special forces.
That was my first. We talked about it in our very first episode. I mean, even if they wanted to be secret, they would just pose as a rancher, another rancher, and say, hey, and go to that. Let's say they suspected in this place in Iowa, they would just drive a big truck up there and say, hey, man, I need some cattle. Well, I ain't got none for sale. How about $10,000 a head, buddy? Well, suddenly I got some for sale.
The U.S. Department of Health and Human Services paid a $800,000 subsidy to build an IHOP in Washington, D.C.
Hell yeah, man, everybody needs an IHOP. Oh, I wish we had an IHOP. I wonder if I could get a grant for that. Have one. Can you believe all the restaurants we have here that we don't have an IHOP?
That's crazy.
It's a crime.
Well, you got that waffle place, so you're doing all right.
No, it's gone, man. That big windstorm came and destroyed that.
Are you serious? Mm-hmm. Waffle storm gone.
Well, and then they rebuilt it and repurposed it. Now it's like a mom and pop type.
Now it's like Denny's.
Yeah. That's funny. I ate at Denny's today.
Did you?
I did for lunch.
Excellent.
Yeah, love Denny's.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't eat there very often, maybe every couple of years, like for traveling or something.
Yeah, so let me ask you this. In all of your research, in all of mine,
I take it you're not a fan.
I'm not.
Yeah, you eat fancy food.
We could just call it food.
My food was very good.
I'm sure it was.
Right off the griddle, man. Right off the grill.
I don't like most of those places because
they don't serve the kind of fancy food you like.
It's not fancy food.
They don't serve wine.
They don't serve edible food. They serve their wine in those glass bottles. I like mine out of a box.
Yeah.
So
whatever.
And let me ask you this: in all of your research, did you find a single cattle mutilation case which made you go, maybe aliens or maybe Bigfoot?
Not really.
No.
The one with just because a lot was made of it, I think. But the one from New Mexico, of the 11-month-old bull, March 24th, 1978, the removal of the rectum, the sex organs, all that certainly be explained. The liver and the heart were mushy. Maybe that could be explained. Had the consistency of peanut butter by parasites, and we've discussed that.
Sure.
They did discover in Los Alamos bacteria in the heart, but they couldn't reach any conclusion of whether that was the cause of death. It's called Clostridium. The liver was found devoid of copper and contained 4 times the level of zinc, potassium, and phosphorus. It was a little strange. Blood samples were reported to be light pink in color, did not clot after several days, and that later the blood was found to have anticoagulants in the samples. I found a little weird. Although you had pointed out there is a specific cow disease that can cause that.
Yeah, there's a consumption of certain types of food that can cause that kind of...
I found that one a little weird. You know, it was well documented, but the connection, okay, if it is, first of all, let's look at the unusual explanations, okay? I really find it unbelievable that the U.S. government would be responsible for the cattle mutilations. It's just, you know, like we said, whatever the reason would be, they would just buy the cattle and then do it themselves.
Could be rogue elements in the government. Could be rogue elements. Could be hungry soldiers. You know, some of those guys are farm boys. They're out flying, and they're like, hey, cow, you guys want steaks?
Yeah, but they don't. All they take is the genitalia, man, and the tongue.
In every case?
Yeah, I mean, typically that's what's missing. Not steaks. They don't, like, cut a ribeye out or something, or a T-bone, you know?
Maybe they're inexperienced.
Right.
Man,
maybe.
This doesn't taste like a steak. This tastes like dick.
But, you know, I mean, for instance, in 1974, a few months after the first spate of alleged mutilations in the U.S., multiple farmers in Nebraska claimed to witness UFOs on the nights their cattle were harmed. One claimed he saw an object which looked as if it had a little bluish green light on each side with a glow surrounding it. The sightings were hailed by UFO researchers as the first physical evidence of extraterrestrial life. Yeah. I don't know. I mean, that's the one explanation that if you really believe in UFOs and things, let's say there are aliens here on Earth or visiting our planet, they go mutilate cattle. I mean, we wouldn't know why. How would you explain that? But I mean, there's just been thousands and thousands of cattle mutilation.
Maybe there are a couple of backwoods aliens and they just get bored, and that's sort of what they do for entertainment.
For me, I think the natural, I mean, on one hand, though, you know, the ranchers, you would think these are experienced ranchers in most cases that wouldn't just jump to conclusions. The very same people we were talking about, you know, salt of the earth type of people that don't trust the government and live out in the boonies somewhere on these big ranches. Certainly they've seen cattle and been around cattle their whole life, and they've seen cattle that have died. What makes them step up and say, this is unusual? Although I will say it is unusual for cattle to die. You don't keep cattle until they die of old age. That's not why you raise cattle.
Yeah.
You raise cattle to be steaks and hamburger and things like that. So typically, I mean, you might have a breeding bull that you'll keep a few years, breeding animals that you'll keep a few years. But you're going to kill it well before it would ever die, most likely die of natural causes. So it's really unusual for a cow or cattle to just kill over and die. I mean, even dairy cows, I mean, they kind of reach a useful maturity and then they're repurposed. Let's just put it that way. You know?
Into a belt or shoes.
You know, that's the thing. Cattle were raised to be a consumable animal. So maybe it is unusual that when they die and the farmer shows up, maybe he doesn't see that many dead cattle in his life. I don't know.
I was trying to find out what the average number of cows that die each year would be. And instead, yeah. I found this article, which I think is relevant. Cows kill more people than sharks. There are approximately 5 deaths caused by sharks annually, while horses kill about 20 people a year, and cows kill 22. So cows are better than horses.
Right.
They're killers. Cows are killers.
I don't know what else I've got to add here. When it gets down to the end of the day, for me, I really think most of these, if not all of the cattle mutilations, are caused by natural phenomena, mainly because we've been able to reproduce the exact effects in a controlled environment. They've put a cow carcass out in a field and watched it for 48 hours, and all these things that they say happen with the quote-unquote mutilation are just natural decomposition of this animal and being affected by predators. So I think at the end of the day, I don't think there's much to it.
Yeah. I was looking over cattle loss, and it's significant. I mean, there's millions of cows lost every year to a variety of diseases and varying ages, too, or predators just out in the wild getting taken down by. And, you know, I wonder how many deaths that are attributed to these unusual cattle mutilations occur in areas that have a high level of predators that are likely to kill them, like wolves or other
mountain
lions,
lions,
other predatory animals.
Well, I think there would be greater signs of trauma on the carcass.
That's true,
if
yeah.
it was a large predator.
That's a good point.
I think it's more likely the animals are just dying of a disease or something like we talked about, like the clover, moldy clover. That's more likely explanation.
Yeah.
And then once the animals are died, it's not necessarily predation as it is
scavenging.
Yeah, scavenging. I mean, I just feel like science has adequately explained this one to me. I don't think there's a huge mystery there. I mean, listeners, if you think there's something there that I'm missing or there's a particular case or two, write into the show. Let me know. First contact at cosmicsponge.com. And let us know what you have found out.
Yeah, I think it's been a while since I've looked at it. I know there is a documentary by Linda Moulton Howe called Alien Harvest, I think. It's been a while since I've seen it. Maybe I need to go back and look at that one because she is convinced. Mm-hmm. And maybe I missed something in that documentary. I've forgotten. It's been a long while since I've looked at it, so... A little while, anyway.
Yeah, she's been into it for quite a while. There's an episode of, I think it's on Amazon right now, or it was a few weeks ago. There's an episode. They only have 3 episodes of it, but some UFO show, and there's 3 episodes available. And one of them's on cattle mutilation. I watched it, and she was on that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, she's big on that particular subject. I think she's, reported on it for quite a while.
Yeah, so definitely anybody out there screaming at us right now through the radio, if we're missing something big, please let us know. Point us in the right direction, and we'll jump back on this and revisit.
Yeah, for sure. Yep. So, you got anything else on cattle mutilations, Jimmy?
No, I'm done.
All right. I think that'll wrap it up for this week's episode. I'd like to remind everyone to please rate and review wherever you listen to your podcast. It helps other people find the show. Please visit cosmicsponge.com right now. You can buy a few souvenirs, t-shirts, and coffee mugs. There'll be a lot more stuff coming soon, and ways to support the show should be coming along any day now, right, Jimmy?
I'm working really hard on coming up with stuff for those 2 things. I think buy me a coffee might be the first thing that we'll put up where people can donate.
All right. Yeah, so like I said, I know we've had some people inquiring how to help us out, and that'll be there. But if you want to, in the meantime, I'd love to be out somewhere and see somebody wearing a Cosmic Sponge T-shirt. I've already given a couple away, some of the samples, so we would give them away if we could. But actually, it costs just about the price that you're going to see on the website for us to have these things made and shipped around. So
yeah, we're not making a lot.
Yeah, at least for now, we're just trying to offer some things. So, if you people want them, we have them for you. Be sure and check out Facebook and Instagram and get fresh UFO stories and a few laughs every day. Jimmy, have I forgotten anything?
I'm sure, but
yeah, probably.
We should probably wrap up anyway.
Yeah. So this is Stephen Hawk signing out, and I'll see you next week.
Jimmy Co, ditto. And I think that's it.
That's all you got this time?
I don't know. Jimmy Co on. I'll see you next week.
Keep your eyes to the sky.
Keep your eyes to the skies and your feet on the ground, and don't touch that dead cow. It might be diseased.
There you go.
Poke it with a stick. That's all for this week's episode of Cosmic Sponge. Please don't forget to rate and review us wherever you listen. It helps others find the show. If you have any questions or have a story you'd like to share, you can contact us using our email account, firstcontact@cosmicsponge.com. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week.